Hello everyone, welcome. My name is AJ Pestridge. Welcome to another P3D video. Today we're going to be talking a conversation about P3D and the future of P3D. Is it actually worth getting P3D? And the difference really between how Lockheed Martin approached their flight simulation software versus how Microsoft approached theirs with the Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'm going to give you a quick history of P3D and a quick history of the Microsoft Sim and explain why Lockheed Martin do things the way they do, the way P3D current version 5 is. We're going to talk about version 6 at the end because Lockheed Martin has kind of announced a sort of future of P3D, which will mean going into a version 6, but they haven't announced version 6 yet. They've also announced that they're working with the Unreal Engine 5, so we'll talk about that. But first off, a little quick history of P3D. So P3D is flight simulation software that is developed by Lockheed Martin, the military sort of industrial complex giant for America. They create planes. They've been doing that for decades. They create software and technologies to help the American sort of defense network system, and also they train the pilots that fly, the very fast jets, the fighters. And they went to Microsoft back in like 2011 or something like that, 2010, 2009, and they purchased the API engine for FSX, the core architecture engine. And the Microsoft sold the license to Lockheed Martin with a little note to say you cannot sell it for entertainment reasons, and like Microsoft wanted the rights solely to that, and so Lockheed Martin have developed like academic and professional training use as a scenario flight sim. They've packaged and repurposed many times. We're on version 5. It came out as version 1, and they have added and updated this 20+ year old code to what we know it today, using DirectX 12, using True Sky, which is a enhanced atmospherics of the sky with the clouds and the atmosphere and everything, which is a modern day sort of engine within. And it runs a lot of different simulations, the sim does. It not only does it still use the BGL sort of engine of building scenery in the world and sim object placement, but all the nav data and everything is run as well by the True Sky or the legacy clouds. But I think they've done a really good job of updating it to run with current hardware, the sort of 30 series graphics cards. The version 1 wouldn't probably run as well on sort of some systems, but Lockheed Martin have really put their time and effort and continually and consistently updated it over the years. If you look at the Learning Center, you can see all the very different versions, everything they've done to it, and I'm sure their next version, which I'm confident will appear at some point in the future, will have even more features and be even more stabilized for the future hardware coming out. So why does Lockheed Martin develop P3D? Why did they do this? Well, back before they invested into software, Lockheed Martin trained their fighter pilots using actual planes, which means they had to be fueled, they had to be leased, they had to be paid for, and that's a lot of costs for training the pilots. Now, don't forget, Lockheed Martin train American pilots for military use, so that's never going to go away. They're never going to stop training pilots, but they're doing it in a very different way these days, using software rather than hardware of planes. Don't get me wrong, they do have hardware avionics that they train on, but it's all run by the software of flight simulation. And Lockheed Martin have really been gracious in allowing the public to obtain a license to use, we probably have a limited or a watered down version of ones that they use. I'm sure there is a lot of sort of either national security or reasons why we don't have the access to what they use to train their pilots, probably for security reasons, but we do get a licensed version which is continually updated by a small team of devs. If you head over to the P3D forums, you can see that there are moderators active all the time in those forums. So, you know, it's when I see people and like some streamers or flight simmers and they just say, well, P3D's dead because there's been a new sim released, it's just not true. It's just laughable to even think that, if you think about it. And we're going to look at the reasons why I think this, and I'm going to basically explain why Lockheed Martin do the P3D the way they do, and most likely will probably continue the same sort of architecture of the sim into the future. Even if they bring in Unreal Engine, they're going to stick to the core of what they know, because any business, you know, you kind of stick with what you know, and if it wins, you build upon that. You don't just suddenly venture off onto unknown territory and go, will it work, guys? We don't know. That's not really how a business strategy is formed. And when you're training America's defense, you can't mess about. Even when they get given money by the government, they've been recently given $632 million for software training. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's just for flight sim. It could be software for other projects as well, but some of that will go into the flight simulation sort of research and development. So they've actually got quite a lot of resources available to them to create an awesome flight sim. And when we look at Microsoft is a company funded by themselves versus Lockheed Martin, who is funded and granted by the government, so unlimited resources really, whereas Microsoft has a very small limited pool of resources, and they've even joined with many different companies to bring the Microsoft Flight Simulator to the public. Asobo Studios is the kind of head of development, and then you have Black Shark AI that handles the terrain mesh and sort of world, and there's loads of others who have brought planes and other bits of assets to that project. But Lockheed Martin, basically the way P3D is designed is to give you the whole world in your PC at the smallest file size possible, you know, because, you know, when you're downloading, you don't want to be downloading 300 gigs of data, because that's A, going to take a long time, but it opens up a lot of windows for error, and if you're downloading and something corrupts, that's going to affect the sim as well. And so they basically want you to download it very small, install it into a medium-sized package, and then build upon that sim yourself. If you want to change the visuals, you can. There is flexibility to do that. If you want to change the aircraft, you can. You want to change the weather, the buildings, the textures, you can really customize the look of that sim to exactly how you want it. And that is the beauty of P3D, it's flexibility. Now, when you look at the Microsoft sim, it's downloaded through the Xbox Game Pass, so you have to have an internet connection, and it downloads like 300 gig of data, so you have to have a good internet connection, otherwise you're going to be there for ages. But not only that, it's updated continually through the online process of having to access the portal of the sort of not the installer, but the app itself. You have to access it through that. You know, if you try and fly completely without any internet connection, you will only get so far, but it downloads the world as you fly within it. So there is 2 petabytes sitting somewhere that is streaming into your home PC on the fly, and if you don't have internet, you're very limited in what you're going to see. Now, that's not practical if you're wanting to train and you're not wanting to be connected to the internet for security reasons. You're going to have a very limited experience, and that's why P3D offer you the world on your PC rather than here's a little bit of the world and then stream it in as you go. You've got the whole world on your sim, on your PC of your sim, and you can develop on it how you wish. Now, also Lockheed Martin, they don't take chances. They don't mess about with people, you know, or practices. So, you know, just because something is new and sort of like shiny, doesn't mean they're suddenly going to switch to doing that, because, well, A, it's not tried and tested, it's not future proof, and it could cost them a lot more money in the future. So let's look at the way Microsoft give you the world. You stream it in from their server using Azure AI and the Black Shark AI sort of world photogrammetry, and it's all coming from like sort of Google Maps. It's Bing Maps, but it's kind of like Google Maps. So the data for that sim, now the data for that sim is available anywhere. You can get it from Google. You can actually create your own photoreal scenery for P3D, and it will look identical to Microsoft, because it's using the same data. But that data comes at a cost of a license. Now, Microsoft might own the Bing Maps sort of assets, but they have to buy that satellite imagery. And in the future, what if that price goes up? What if the cost of obtaining the world becomes too much for the profit of the sim? Now, when the sim was released, it released that many people. They made like 25 million off its initial release. That's a lot of money for initial sort of sales. But if you look at how many users were using that flight sim on sort of the first month or the first few months, it was millions. Now it's down to hundreds of thousands. There's been a massive fall off of people, mainly because they're gamers that the market was put to, and gamers sort of play a game to death and then move on, and so the fall off is continual. Now, the pool of people who will want to use flight simulation software is not that big. Even with the gamer market, it's not that big, and so you've only got so many people you can sell your product to. Now, once you sell that product, when Microsoft give you, or you buy it, they've made the majority of their money. Obviously, with third-party development sort of partnerships, they take a percentage of anything people sell as well, so they get a revenue from that. They get revenue from social media, from YouTube, Twitch, websites. They get a revenue from that. I'm sure they get revenues from other places for their flight sim, but at the end of the day, when you add it all up, that will only make a certain amount of profit. And once you sell to everybody in that pool, you've got no one else to sell to. You're reliant on the return sales, the percentages that are taken from the third-party developer. So if suddenly they abandon ship, you're really screwed from making money. Now, I want to talk about how Microsoft create their flight sim, the history of it, and why in a moment. But like I said before, Lockheed Martin have been given a massive a massive amount of money, 632 million, which provides engineering, maintenance, logistics, and material support to continue to develop, sustain, and produce software builds, as well as carry out development flight tests in support for the F-35 Lightning II aircraft for the Air Force. So, like, this money, which has come from America, the government, they're putting into their flight sim software. The amount of money it costs Microsoft to make the Microsoft Flight Simulator was about 200 million. So Lockheed Martin have a larger pool to create, and like I said before, they did announce that they were working with the Unreal Engine 5, which is like the future of gaming graphics. In fact, they actually put a statement out on their website: for realistic training, simulations need to accurately depict how real assets act in a real environment. Today, Lockheed Martin is changing the game when it comes to increased simulation realism with the help from Unreal Engine. It's an open and advanced 3D game engine developed by Epic Games, is engaged in a long-term research and development effort with Lockheed Martin, so they're in partnership with Lockheed Martin to create more realistic simulation solutions. This technology capitalizes on commercial game engine advancements for an integrated, scalable architecture that leverages an extensible plugin framework for future training and visualization efforts. Now, when we first started talking about P3D version 6 and speculated that I hope they work with Unreal Engine 5, it does actually look like they're going down that route. But don't get me wrong, they're not suddenly going to bring out a new version with it's just Unreal Engine 5. That's not tried and tested. They'll most likely just sort of take snippets of the Unreal Engine 5 and slowly integrate it into their current architecture. So I imagine, or I speculate, that version 6 will have a very similar architecture to version 5, that you'll be able to install your add-ons from the past into the future, as long as the third-party developers support that and also update their add-ons. You know, there should be nothing wrong with you being able to port or use past add-ons in the next version. Obviously, this is pure speculation. There has been no announcement from Lockheed Martin, so we don't actually know what version 6 will be like, when it's coming, you know, or any of these intricate details of like, will past add-ons work. But Adam Breed, the strategic technology architect at Lockheed Martin, is focused on simulation and training by making Lockheed Martin's products the best in the industry and effectively creating a safer and better world. Now, what he means by that is, you've got to remember, Lockheed Martin does not create flight simulation software for consumers. They don't do it for the flight sim community. They do it for themselves for training purposes, and they want the best for their pilots to train on. So what they train their pilots on is not what we get. We get a different version, an academic or a professional licensed version, whereas Lockheed Martin has a much fuller, like, their planes are more highly detailed in the flight sim in terms of the avionics. In fact, there is a plane that is manufactured, the software, by a flight sim developer, A2A, and like, there is no model for it. It is literally just the software that goes in, and then they have the hardware version of that plane that the software connects to. Obviously, we'll never have access to this because massive security breach if it fell into, you know, enemy hands, or there'd be national security risks all over the place. So we don't actually get that one. But the F-35 that we do get is an okay version, but it isn't the one that they use, and it's not. And it's the same for the sim. Version 5 of P3D isn't exactly the same as what we use. So that's really what he's talking about, is the best in the industry, the best in the military industry, and then what we will get is a much sort of watered down version, most likely, of that. I don't expect version 6 to be full Unreal Engine 5. That's a little bit, you know, because they're having to build the world from the ground up. That's actually going to take a few years. But I do believe that is the direction they want to go in. They even state, when Unreal Engine comes into play, it allows Lockheed Martin to lead ahead and focus on the things that we're good at doing. For instance, integrating avionics systems and creating immersive learning environments. Now, again, they're talking about training pilots. They're talking about, you know, the military defense of America. They're not talking about the flight sim community, but we do get to sort of piggyback on that technology and take advantage of it. I know for a fact they have something like 10 petabytes of data for their sort of photoreal scenery, which when you compare it to the Microsoft photo scenery, it's only 2 petabytes. It's more highly detailed. In fact, it even sort of the data within that imagery contains heat, you know, maps, as well as just visual photography, which the Google Maps and the Bing Maps don't actually have. So when they do start running or giving us consumers a much richer flight sim in the future, we will gain massively. So Lockheed Martin, like I said, has announced that they are working with the Unreal Engine 5, so that is now fact, like we speculated in the past. But I don't really see version 6 being a full UE5. I imagine it's just going to have aspects of it used and most likely repurposed for their own sort of use as well. It probably won't be the core code that they use. It'll be something repackaged like Microsoft did. You know, they took the Unreal Engine 4, they redid it for themselves, and it's kind of a little bit of that, a little bit of the Black Shark AI program that generates the world. Like, here's your AI server that sort of maps everything to the photoreal. They'll repackage and purpose it for what they need. But again, why does Lockheed Martin do this the way they do it? Basically, they want their training software to be future-proof. They want to be always able to access it and use it. If suddenly the internet went down, if suddenly servers went offline, if suddenly the data that they used for the core of their sim was not available or financially unobtainable, they're screwed. They can't train their pilots. Do you really think America would allow its defense network system to be hampered by its technology? Never. So Lockheed Martin, the way they do things is to make sure you get it and you can use it and you're not hampered by your own technology. You know, if the internet goes down, the Microsoft Flight Sim is very limited in what it can bring. In fact, it probably won't even work. If your personal internet went down, which can happen very easily, you can't fly until it comes back online. I've been weeks without the Microsoft Flight Sim because my internet's been out, but I can fly in P3D, not a problem. This is why live weather does not ship native with the default program, unlike say X-Plane and Microsoft. You can have live weather with the default program, but that's reliant on an internet connection to deliver the ongoing live data. That's why P3D has never had live weather added as a feature, because it's reliant on the internet connection, and Lockheed Martin do not want you reliant. In order to use your sim, obviously you've got to be reliant on it to download it, but once you've downloaded it, you don't need your internet to use it. And that's why Lockheed Martin create P3D the way they do. It's a tried and tested architecture API engine. It's been going for more than 20 years. The way it's run, the BGL, has everything you need in order to fly planes. Developers have been developing for it for decades, so it's very simple in terms of know-how, but it might not be the best in terms of application like the Microsoft drag and drop sort of developing for. But you know, that was built on a sort of brand new engine at the time, and the engine running, you know, P3D is about 20 years old, so you know, it has limitations. And I think Lockheed Martin have really maxed out the sort of what that engine can do, and it is time to move on, and they're slowly going to move on, but it's just going to take time. I really believe version 6 will still continue what is a winning formula for the architecture of the sim. So it will be very much like version 5, but it'll have a little bit of Unreal Engine 5 in it. It'll be more refined. It will be better for future hardware for the 30 and 40 series, the graphics card. You know, it's always been sort of built around the Intel and Nvidia graphics cards, but I imagine, maybe, hopefully, it's also going to cater a lot more for the AMD side of people who want to use that. So that is why Lockheed Martin creates their flight sim the way they do. So let's talk a quick history of Microsoft Flight Sim. Now, the history of Microsoft and flight simulation, it goes back to the 80s. They've been doing it from the very beginning. They purchased the core code for their very first one, which was very natively sort of basic when you look at things today, and they released it, and they've been updating it. And it wasn't until Microsoft 2004, the Century of Flight, that the community really was able to get involved and enhance that sim. And then when FSX came out, it was tried and tested, it was perfected, and it just blew up from there. And people started creating add-ons and became businesses as developers. And it went on, and they even, you know, brought out FS 2002, the FSX program, and then after that they brought out one called Flight, which was going to be like Microsoft Flight Simulator, a pure online experience where you would fly within the world and it would come in on the fly, and you would basically get your world region by region. It didn't take off. Nobody really took it because they were so used to having the world on their PC. Now they're expected to pay for the world bit by bit. It didn't go down well. Microsoft canned that project. You can still get it. I have flown it on this channel. It is actually quite decent, and you can see what they're trying to do in terms of the graphics, but it never took off, so they never advanced it. I think you can only fly around Hawaii and Alaska in that sim. And then, of course, they started to create with Dovetail Games FS World, and it was more refined. It was using Orbex Landscapes global products as their core base for the sim. The planes had a lot more detail, a lot more effects put into it as well, like windshield sort of cracking, and the way that sort of wind went around the propeller. It was quite advanced, and it actually does look better than FSX when you look at it. And you can see where the core of Microsoft Flight Simulator came from, truly. And it was in an alpha access, I think, state back in 2015, and then suddenly in 2016 or 2017 they canned it. But Dovetail Games said we're stepping away, and what really happened is that Microsoft began development on Microsoft Flight Simulator, and so you know, Dovetail, who were in partnership with Microsoft, you know, Microsoft still owned that sim no matter what. So Microsoft shut that sim down in order to release in like 5 to 6 years later the Microsoft Flight Simulator that we know. And they basically turned their back on Flight Sim World, on Microsoft Flight, and they also turned their back, although they did come back to it in the future, but they did turn their back on FSX as well, and they shut down their Flight Sim sort of studio completely, and literally turned their back on the whole community. So Microsoft do have this ongoing reputation of leaving the Flight Sim community when it doesn't work for them. The reason is because they are a business and they do need to make money, of course. And if it's not making profit, no business is going to be allowed to go into debt or bankruptcy because of a single product. So they refine it, they move on from it, they refine it. But obviously they found a way to make it work, and they've come back into the community with the Microsoft Flight Sim simulator. And you know, if in the future the community just left that sim, Microsoft would leave that sim too. If it stopped making them profit in any point in the future, they would leave that sim. In fact, they have only given a 10-year commitment, which we're 2 years into now, of support for the Microsoft Flight Simulator. So after the next 8 years, God knows what's going to happen. Will the Microsoft Flight Simulator still be around? P3D, on the other hand, is backed by a company that isn't motivated by profits. It's granted money from the government, so they have unlimited resources, but they don't actually go into making this flight sim for us for profit. In fact, for all the licenses they sold to the consumer, to us Flight Sim community members, I doubt that it even pays for 1 day of their lunch staff canteen, bill. They've probably sold more licenses to themselves for military training, probably upwards of 5 million. And I bet it's not even exceeded 30,000 in total for the Flight Sim community. In fact, if you look at recent surveys, less than 1,000 people still use P3D, either alongside another flight sim or as a sole flight sim. So they don't make any money from us. Seriously, they're not doing it for profit. Microsoft are. They need the profit. And if the profit's not there, nor will the sim be. And they have a history of dumping their projects if it doesn't make money, because Microsoft aren't stupid. They are a massive company. If it doesn't work, they will abandon and move on. Simple as that. So, but why does Microsoft develop flight sim software? Like, why do they even do it? Well, it's one short answer: money. They do it to make profit. Microsoft does anything to make profit, and I'm not knocking them. I'm not trying to slate them. That's not a dig at them. It's a business, obviously, and that's what they have to do. So any product they, develop and release has to make money. But that is why that sim exists. It exists to make money. And if you look at how they released it, how they advertised it, how they are knitting with the community to sort of help develop it, they are doing all of this purely to gain an audience. That is why they went after the gamer market, because it's so big compared to the flight sim market, which is so small. They brought in hundreds of thousands of new members into the flight sim community. We do have to thank the Microsoft Flight Sim for that. It is a good flight sim, and I'm not going to get into a debate of which is better. It's completely subjective. It's a personal preference to yourself. There is no one flight sim to rule them all. That just doesn't exist. And when people say P3D or X-Plane is dead because of Microsoft, they just simply don't know what they're talking about. Every flight sim is valid. You can have all of them, or you can have only one. It's personal preference. I personally enjoy P3D. I use that as my main flight sim. I do have X-Plane 12. I probably won't be investing into scenery and airports and airplanes as much as I did with P3D. I also have the Microsoft Flight Sim. I won't be investing heavily into scenery and airports for that sim. I will use the default and get planes for it that I don't have available in P3D. But Microsoft developed Flight Sim for profit. And they're good at it. They've been doing it for decades. They're really good at it. And that is why the Microsoft Flight Simulator looks the way it does, and why it's garnered such a huge crowd, because they've been doing it much longer than Lockheed Martin. They know exactly how to make a flight sim and make it work. Their latest one uses, at the time, the latest engine. It's now outdated, but I'm sure they're going to refine it moving forward and update it. They recently brought in DirectX 12, which is a much more flexible environment to create games in than DirectX 11. There's a lot of limitations with DirectX 11, but there's also a lot of advantages. It's a tried and tested environment, DirectX 11, whereas DirectX 12 is kind of in its infancy, so there's still a lot more learning to go on, which is what Lockheed Martin found out exactly with P3D version 5. It used DirectX 12 exclusively, and it's still sort of finding its feet still. But the community sadly just hasn't given version 5 the time of day, because when the shiny new toy came out, they dropped that one and went straight for the new one. And of course, when the community does that, the developers follow trend because they need to sell to that community. So P3D has seen a lot of developers fall off the Lockheed Martin bandwagon, as it were, in favor of Microsoft. Now, in the future, if Microsoft dump that sim, or it becomes too unprofitable for them, or for whatever reason, P3D seems to be a safer bet. I bet you those developers will come back. How welcomed they are, I don't know, but I mean, there's still a lot of developers that have stuck with P3D and will continue to stick with them. I know Orbex, A2A, Creative Design Studios, people like that will honestly continue to stick with P3D into the future. People like Aerosoft UK 2000 have actually announced, nope, we're discontinuing our development and support of your products for P3D. We're focusing only on Microsoft Flight Sim moving forward, so we're developing new products only for that sim. It is what it is. Even sadly, UK 2000 have recently announced that they've actually sort of even dumping their current customers by saying we're shutting down the servers of your access to your add-ons for your account. So if you want your add-ons, download them now, because they ain't going to be available in the future. I don't know how they're going to update airports into the future, if they're going to do it for you. I don't know, but you won't have access to those add-ons unless you get them now. So for me, the future of Microsoft Flight Sim is got a massive question mark on it, whereas the future of P3D is safe and secure and will always be there, because America always needs to train its pilots for defense purposes. Lockheed Martin are never going to abandon their flight sim because they need it. Microsoft, if they don't need it to make money, and if it doesn't make money, they'll flick it. So if I want to use a flight sim, I want to use a flight sim that is going to be here in 20 years time. And if I had to hedge a guess of which flight sim would be, P3D will definitely be here in 20 years time in whatever form it is. Microsoft Flight Sim, man, I don't even know if it's going to last 10 years. Seriously. The funding for Microsoft comes from itself. They have to generate their entire cash for their projects. Lockheed Martin gets given a lot of money from the government. So really, there's a limited amount of money that Microsoft can pump into, and then they expect the community to reimburse and to put the rest in. But if the community ain't there suddenly, which I'm sure it never will be, I'm sure the community will always be there for Microsoft, but if it somehow in the future falls off for whatever reason, guys, that sim is in serious trouble. And in 8 years time, I'm really wondering what is going to happen to that sim. Will they hand it over to Asobo and move on? Or if it's continuing to make money, will they continue to develop it and make it even better? Or who knows what? It's a question mark. We don't know. What we do know is that Lockheed Martin will always develop P3D. Now, let's look at the two sims and the engines. This isn't a comparison video, by the way. We're going to talk about sort of P3D version 6 in a minute, but this is no comparison video. I'm just sort of trying to make awareness for the differences between the two sims, why they are the way they are, and get a bit more information, sort of correct information, out to the community, because I just see too much misinformation in the community. Too many people claiming this, claiming that, and it's just not true. It's not accurate. And I'm talking about people who have hundreds or even thousands of followers who buy into this information that sort of person is giving out, and it isn't true. P3D is not dead. It will never die. Anyway, the Microsoft engine, like I said before, is a mixture of Unreal Engine 4 proprietary and sort of their own developed sort of minor engines as well. So it's a mixture of engines really, and I'm sure it will be developed on in the future. The P3D engine is run from an API architecture from 20 plus years ago. It's tried and tested. It works. It's reliable, and it's flexible, so you can sort of tweak it and build upon it. But they're moving into the modern day age with Unreal Engine 5. So moving forward into the future, we will see more Unreal Engine 5 in versions of the future. But to me, if we look at the difference of how they're approaching their sims, man, I don't hear anything from the Microsoft camp saying that we're moving into the future with our engine. I see it from Lockheed Martin, but Microsoft is still working on that engine from yesteryear. Black Shark AI have announced working with Unreal Engine 5, so maybe there will be some assets in the sim of the future that sort of have got the next generation of graphics or the engine of the future, but I don't see that in the sim right now. Obviously version 5 still uses the yesteryear code, but also they've integrated modern day programs into that sim like True Sky. So Lockheed Martin are actually showing how forward moving they are, whereas Microsoft is kind of at a standstill at the moment. Maybe they are moving forward in the future with planned things like Lockheed Martin are, but it's not in the sim now. They've only just made the leap into DirectX 12. You can decide which one to use in the sim. So the two engines are run very differently. The two sims are run very differently. The way they manage those sims is completely different. And there is only probably one, sim and the company that will be still, in that community in 10 years' time. So the future of P3D and Microsoft Flight Simulator, I just think it's a clear, obvious choice of who will still be flying what sim 15 years down the line. Because everything I've said just indicates the stability, the reliability, and the commitment from Lockheed Martin. Whereas Microsoft has abandoned 3 flight sims of the past. They're doing it for money. If it doesn't make money, they ain't going to support it anymore. End of story. The developers who make the third-party add-ons will just go where the money goes because they need to stay alive. That's obvious. There's nothing wrong with that. But the way they handle their transition could be a little bit better. If you sell a product, and I'm really talking to Aerosoft here, or UK 2000, if you sell a product with a contract of agreement to say you have support if it fails on you, you have to honor that agreement. Somebody goes to buy off your website a plane, an airport, a regional pack, whatever. You must offer support for that product as well alongside that purchase. Just because they bought it doesn't mean your relationship with that customer has ended. You have a commitment, you have a responsibility to help them into the future. Just because you've put your eggs in different baskets does not mean you have to throw the basket out just because you want to, or focus because you haven't got the resources. Get the resources. Don't be greedy and just be reliable. Do what's morally right and support the community that helped make you. By abandoning flight sims, by saying we're no longer doing this, we're no longer doing that, it just kind of shows the community what you're made of, and it will limit your sales and it will hamper. I know a lot of third-party developers have actually announced a decline in sales of P3D when they've said we're no longer supporting it. Well, obviously, people will no longer buy your products if you're not supporting the sim. And so there will be a decline in that sort of avenue of flight sim, but obviously they'll have an increase in other areas. But, one day that same thing will happen to that sim, and then they'll say the same thing. But nobody's going to come back to you in the future if the way you've treated the community is a little bit shitty. But that's my personal opinion, to be honest. I stick with what I know, and I stick with what works and wins. And people who show their greed and their lack of loyalty to a community, I don't really want to back them. I don't really want to play ball with them. I'm happy doing the flying that I'm doing, and that is the most important thing. If you're happy in your flight sim, that's it. That's all it is at the end of the day. That's all you need to know. Doesn't matter which flight sim is better. They all have their differences. They all have their benefits, and you know, they all have their pluses and minuses. But there is no one sim that is going to win them all. You know, it's just who's going to be here tomorrow, basically. That's really the most important thing. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I think it's gone on long enough. Version 6 is coming out. It is obvious. It hasn't been officially announced, but it's coming out. I'm sure they're working on it. Who knows what it will be? I'm confident to say I'm sure that the previous add-ons will still work, but if the third-party developers are there to update their add-ons is a different question. So, you know, just because they can work in the sim doesn't mean they will work. Just really depends if the third-party developers are going to be there as well. I hope third-party developers who are watching this realize that in the future P3D will be here no matter what, and the new toy Microsoft Flight Sim might not, and so maybe they'll come back and support their community by updating their add-ons, because it only takes time to update for the future, you know, but that shows a lot to the community when they do. I know Orbex have always updated their products. PMDG, FS Labs, Creative Design Studios, they've supported each flight sim variation and updated their products to every single one. In fact, Creative Design Studios stands out to me because even with a small pool of customers, they've still supported their community by updating, you know, from version 4 to version 5. You know, they had no reason to really, but they did, and you still can buy and get the support for those products. Anyway, guys, I do a giveaway every single month. 50 euros of sim market vouchers for flight sim add-ons. All you have to be within with a chance to win is be a subscriber on my channel, leave a comment down below in, you know, any of my P3D videos, and at the end of the month I will announce the winner. Somebody just won the £100 voucher, and I'll be announcing at the end of this month the winner for the vouchers for January. Thank you so much for watching this. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.